Okay, in the last video we saw how to paint the torso and we create a unique red palette. We feel motivated and let's paint the rest of elements. We start painting the leg using this orange we created in our palette, but first we have to decide, or in this case we have to notice where the light comes from. It comes from the side, it comes from the right. This is the mainly thing we have to focus. As I told you, the figure, the illustration, will have three sources of light. This is really interesting. Now, dividing the first warm source of light and the cold light is shadow, strong shadow, so we sketch it with ultramarine blue. You see how we change now to the strokes instead of pointing, because the leg, the surface, let us to play with this. The torso has too much details to make large strokes. Now, for the bluish light, we get this gray tone and we do the same. We sketch with stripes, trying to do a correct line, a straight line. And we always have in mind the weapon, the source of light. You see, like we take like mental measurements of how the light affects there, how will affect other parts of the armor, and always we have the illustration on front. Now we get a little bit more of value in the highlights, and now it's time to point, because we want control. It's a small shape, it's a small area we have to paint, and with little dots we create texture and contour. It's time to unify. We get the base tone, the pure red of golden, and we give a wash, you see, through all the surface. Next step is to get more thickness but the same red, and try to create a well degraded step between the shadow and the light. You see, I grab the paint starting in the shadow, I end in the light, because I want to control where I let the drop, where I let the pigment. One of the characteristics of red is that it's a color that, painting over a white surface, the white changes the luminosity, it gains a lot. The red stains a lot, that white. But if we use that red to paint over a black surface, we need a lot of red. That's why we need a lot of thickness when we unify a black or a dark area. And that's why the golden paint are better than the scale 75, because they are more thickness. The quality of the pigment is better. Here you can start noticing the difference. We also can place that dots over the shadow, not only in the intersection. We dry it, and look how the red always shines. This I'm placing here is a layer of ultramatte varnish from AK, directly from the bottle. This gets rid of all the shines. We dry it, and this is our work. We can see it now better with no shines. We are getting the unification done. But the problem about giving so much dots is that in the beginnings we tend to do irregular shapes, and now I'm talking about the shadow. Look how irregular is the shadow. It has dots inside of it. It's not a smooth, it's not a straight shape of shadow, but the solution is quite easy. You get the dark shadow red tone and we fill the gaps. You see, when I see a red dot inside the shadow, I cover it, and slowly we start recreating the shape. Remember, the most important part in light is the position and the shape of it. We continue correcting and look at the point of the brush. Look at the amount of charge it has. It has only in the tip, and the red has barely water, only a bit of water. You see, I fill the gaps now with that red. The more we focus trying to fill those gaps, the more smooth it will get. And in addition, it will add a texture, an interesting damaged texture that gives personality to the armor. We do the same with the blue-gray tone, but in this case we dilute more the paint and we use the point glazing technique. This means that the brush is only a bit loaded, we dry it really well before we paint, and we get only with the point of the brush. You see? This is different than before, that we was unifying that dark tone. Look how interesting it gets. This is perfect, for example, to paint leather, or in busts to paint faces. Now we get a bit more of white in the mix and we paint in a smaller area than before. Again, we start in the center of the shape we're going to do and slowly we spread out all the dots. And I only focus in that part of the highlight, not in the whole length of the previous highlight. This is a much more interesting approach. And another highlight, adding a bit more of white in a smaller area than before. If we want to remind how to do this technique, you have the beginner's video where I explain it step by step, how to load your brush, how to dilute it, where of the hair you have to get paint, and with a few more touches we have our cold light done. Now, in the inferior shadow that the cylinder creates, we're gonna use more dark tone. This means less value because that part has more deep shadows in it. The beautiful thing about painting is that when you paint some part, the brain immediately notice other parts that you already painted that maybe needs little touches. This is always an alive process. The more points you give, the more you notice how the two lights melt with each other. And when you control this technique, you will see how easy it is to achieve results, the powerful of one dot, and the useful it is when you have to paint small areas. Sorry about the blur, now I'm painting the orange, the warm light, the same technique. In the moment that the figure needs a stroke instead of a point, just give it. It depends a lot in the surface. You have to talk with the figure. And here I'm placing more saturation in the mid-tone with a glaze of red. This means that almost always when you see illustration, when you study a picture or you observe reality, you have to understand that shadows and light are almost always more desaturated than the mid-tone of the objects. The mid-tone, if we divide the light in three, the mid-tone will be the red and the light will be the orange. You see, the orange is a lot more desaturated than the red. Pay attention to these details. Now here, another important detail. If you go to the inferior part of the torso, you see that it creates a triangle, the same triangle that we did in the torso, but in this case, in light. This is another small detail that is really interesting because we have to create a shadow, a cast shadow of the leg that cuts this light and again brings the figure together. Apart from that, we highlight a bit the edge of some parts of the leg. Highlighting the edge is really important. We paint the other leg with the same process. I'm not going to show you because it's really bored, but I have to stop here. Now it's the moment to close an eye and see if we are painting the stroke well, and see if we can notice that stroke in the principal view of the figure when you take a picture. Maybe we have to make that silhouette highlight by painting now a bit further in the middle. So stop sometimes, close an eye, that's like taking a picture, and observe, correct, and continue painting. Do you see the silhouette in the inferior part of the leg now? That's the effect we have to get. And we finished that leg. An interesting part of this one is that the cold source of light is near this leg than the other one. So we represent this by adding more highlight value in the cold lights. You see there the difference? We are representing the power of that light. Pay attention to these details and change the value of light depending of the distance of the source of light. And as we painted the cast shadow of the leg, the arm, etc., we have to paint the cast shadow of the chains. All objects, all little objects needs to create volume, needs to create shadow. So we get our dark tone and we start sketching that circular shape that has the chain. We add some scratches. We first painted it with ultramarine blue and then we paint the highlights with a white gray. And with the lesson learned, we finished the rest of the legs. Now here I want to show you how to sculpt with paint. I try to do the tear sculpt the best I can, but I couldn't do that sharp edge in the end. So how to fix it? We paint first the background with white because we want a clear color to paint a vivid red over it. And then with dark blue, we sharp really well the edge, creating the shape we want. Do you see? We sculpted with paint. Now we give a wash of red over it and see the saturation of that red. Now we paint a little half moon in the bottom part of it. Blue-white shine that comes from the energy weapon, little dots here and there. And we did the same with the warm tone, but in the bottom part. And it's done. And once we finished painting all the bottom part of the figure, look at how we achieve the 2D effect, the illustration playing with the silhouettes. In the next video I will focus painting the shoulder part. That's a really interesting and fun part to paint.